Hello everyone. So welcome to our latest edition of Avon Book Fest. I'm joined by SD Robertson and BP Walter, two of our brilliant authors, and they're going to be letting us know a bit about their journey to publishing and answering a few questions, and of course they'll be answering all of your questions as well. So please do post those in the Q&A box down below, and I will keep an eye out. So before we kick off, I just wanted to remind you all that you can submit your own manuscripts to us here at Avon Books. If you just head to avonbooks.co.uk/submissions, you'll find all the details there. You don't need an agent, just a completed manuscript, and all the guidelines are on our website to help you. So yeah, do just head over there and take a look. So over to Barnaby and Stuart. You guys obviously both have books out at the moment. So Barnaby, your second book, Hold Your Breath, published in April, and Stuart, your fifth book, How to Save a Life, publishes on the 11th of June, so really soon. So yeah, can you tell us a bit about them and yeah, just let people know what they can expect?
You want to go first, Barnaby?
After you.
After me, okay. Right, so my new novel, my fifth novel with Avon, is called How to Save a Life. It's out next Thursday, the 11th of June. And it's basically a redemption story about a man called, Luke Craven, who's a bit of a curmudgeon. He's very much a glass half empty type who's been dealt several bad hands in life. There's a freak accident right at the start of the story, and a stranger, a brilliant young doctor, as it happens, saves his life, only to be killed herself. I'm not giving too much away because this all happens pretty much in the first chapter. The experience has a profound effect on Luke and gradually changes his whole outlook on life. Knowing he's been given a second chance, he sets out to make it count, to try to become a better man in tribute to the woman who saved him. And this starts small, saying yes to things rather than his habitual no, and soon builds into something more substantial. He finds a way to try and make a difference in life, helping people less fortunate himself. But life, as it always does, still has several curveballs to throw at Luke, and his resolve to change does get severely tested. So as to how that turns out, you'd have to find out by reading the book. But that gives you a little idea about what it is, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a nice, uplifting and heartwarming read, I would have to say. So Barnaby, did you want to tell us a little about Hold Your Breath? Sure.
Hold Your Breath, which I have a copy of here. Here we go. Although I think the lens will make the writing look wrong way around, probably. So just imagine that it makes sense. Oh, it actually is the right way around. So there you go. It's the right way around.
Yeah.
It is. Oh, super. That's great. Well, then you can see it. And the cover, I absolutely adore with this. When my editors first sent me the cover, I was over the moon because it's just brilliant. I love the really big whole pink font. But anyway, this is a psychological thriller, as you can probably tell from the cover. And it's about a young girl called Kitty, whose family is going through a very strange time. Her mother's behaviour is becoming increasingly disturbing. And at the end of his tether, the father decides to take his family, takes Kitty and her mum to a dark forest, to a cottage in the middle of the dark forest. And from then on, some very strange experiences happen to Kitty and her family. And it's partly told from Kitty's perspective as an adult, with her trying to make sense of what's happened, including through questions with a police interview. And it becomes clear that something truly tragic happened in the forest at that time when she was a child. And the novel follows that journey into her accepting what happened and the ways that she's tried to deal with it. So it's very much of a kind of slightly spooky, slightly creepy, kind of foresty, nightmarish kind of thriller. So yeah, that's Hold Your Breath.
Yes, very twisty and gripping. And obviously that's out now, and Stuart's book, as a reminder, is coming out.
I'll do that now.
Oh yeah, yeah, I do. We've got copies there. So yeah. So yeah, you've both got brilliant backgrounds, lots of books there. You're putting me to shame as an editor. So Stuart, obviously your first book released in 2016 with Avon, and Barnaby, your debut, released last year. But you've both been part of the industry for a while, because Barnaby, you've been on the book selling side of things for a lot longer. So what led you both to writing? I don't know whether you want to kick us off, Stuart.
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a writer from a young age. I suppose it's what a lot of authors say, but it's definitely true in my case. I sort of got to the end of university still thinking I want to be a writer, but didn't really feel like I knew what I wanted to write about. So I sort of quite consciously went into newspaper journalism, thinking, it'll hone my writing skills. It'll give me a lot of chances to meet interesting people, do interesting things. And yeah, in the back of my mind for the sort of 9-10 years I was a journalist, from which I went from being just like a junior reporter right up to being an editor of a local newspaper. I had in the back of mind I wanted to be a novelist still. And ultimately, when newspapers were getting cut back a lot, they decided to close my local office, which was based just down the road from where I live, and centralise everything. And there was an opportunity on the table to take voluntary redundancy and do something else. So I said to my wife, thinking she'd say no, do you fancy doing a swap? Because at the time she was a stay-at-home mom and I was the one who was the breadwinner. And somehow I managed to convince her. We did the swap. I became the stay-at-home dad. And while my daughter was at school, she just started primary school, I wrote, and it basically went from there.
Yeah, lucky for us here at Avon, definitely. And what about you, Barnaby? Obviously, you work as for Waterstones and things. So do you want to tell us a bit how that led to you crossing over to the dark side and writing yourself?
Yes, I used to be a bookseller for Waterstones, and I think putting the amazing books of other authors on the tables each show. It used to be a weekend bookseller, and each Sunday I would peruse all the new titles and be just in awe, really, of the authors who had managed to create a book and have it as something so tangible and something that you could see as an achievement that was very obvious, I think, to hold, and I think that's very special. And I as my career progressed, I now work for the head office of Waterstones. I coordinate the company's social media, and which gave me the opportunity to talk to loads of amazing authors. And of course, we don't have so many amazing authors in the office right now because the offices are closed due to the current situation. But we're still dealing with amazing writers day to day. And over my time there, it's been possible for me to talk to authors about the things that have inspired them, the ways that they've got published, the things that they've done, and all of this was just wonderful, really, for someone who's always wanted to do something creative. And I don't think I always knew that it was writing books that I wanted to do. And I did English and film studies at university, and for a period I thought I might want to go into filmmaking, but I think filmmaking involves a lot of other people's time and money and responsibilities and things like that, whereas if you're writing, it's just literally you in a room with a laptop with your one idea, which seemed less daunting, really. So I chose that, and it's been wonderful so far.
Brilliant. So obviously I've mentioned that you guys have both been involved in the industry in various ways for a good few years now. So what do you guys think has changed in the time that you've been involved in the industry, either for the better or the worse?
I think from my perspective, I mean, I don't have quite the insight into the industry perhaps that Barnaby does, sort of seeing things from both sides. But I think as an author, to some extent, you only see the part of the industry that affects yourself. And you are a little bit removed from it, and you're sort of in your little office or lounge or kitchen table or wherever you happen to be writing. And just, I think sometimes it's easier just to focus on that. But I mean, I've definitely seen, I mean, ebooks were already quite big when I first brought out my first book, but I think that continues to increase, and I've certainly sold a lot of books through that medium, and I don't think that's going to change. And as important as other kind of books are, I think I kind of look at it as an ebook now is kind of what a paperback was when paperbacks first came out, and I think that will continue. And the importance of selling in supermarkets and stuff like that, again, that was already happening when my first book came out, but I think books are sold in other places than just bookshops, and maybe that's a little bit different at the moment with things as they are, but yeah, those are the kind of things I've noticed. I mean, as I say, I'm not sort of quite as actively involved in it as perhaps Barnaby is, so maybe he'd have some more comments on that.
Yes, I think there's been a lot of changes even since I started working I worked as a bookseller from, I think it was 2007 or 8 to 2015, and over that 7 or 8 year period, I think a lot changed, and even more probably in the last 5 years. And I think there's some for the good, some for the bad. I think it's sad that probably the space of bookshops on the high street has probably reduced or contracted, and I'm very lucky that I work for a book retailer that's still putting books into people's hands, but I'm standard in a way that or at least I hope we would never get to a point where the idea of browsing in a bookshop is a hard to obtain luxury. I'd like that to remain very normal for readers, really. So I think there's been changes in that area, and the rise of the Kindle and the rise of the ebook has certainly been a disruptor, I think. Not necessarily a bad one, and not all disruptors are bad, of course, and it's brilliant that more people are reading in many different ways. So it's been a very interesting thing to change. I think the biggest change has been the rise of the event title, and the title that gets the big, huge push, I think. And which is great, I think, for that author. But I think there's probably more room for a lot of books now to get forgotten or lost in the noise than perhaps ever before. Particularly with the volume of books being published, I think that's probably getting easier. So I think the onus is falling a lot more on authors now to do things like events like this, and to be on social media and do other things other than the writing that they probably are trying to get to back to doing. So yeah, I think there has been big changes, and I think there'll probably be a lot more, really, as the industry develops.
Can I just ask you something, actually, Barnaby? I know you've got an interest in horror and that kind of thing as well. I remember very much as a sort of a young reader, the vast amount of horror writing, as just to give an example, that was around, and how many different authors there were. And today, there's Stephen King. And it's kind of links to what you say with the big name authors. He's hugely popular, and he's a fantastic author, but I don't see it seems to be a difficult place to come out, to emerge as just a sort of specific horror writer these days, to give an example.
Yes, yeah, I think it probably is, and I think it's difficult for genres that get pigeonholed, I think, as quite niche, or as to break that down. And I think there have been books that have kind of pushed against that, books like The Lonely and others. But yeah, I do know what you mean, and I think it's hard to get that, what Stephen King has, that household name kind of quality to a particular genre. Although, of course, he doesn't like the idea of being put as a horror writer. But yeah, I think with genre, I think at least I count myself very lucky as for writing in psychological thrillers, when there seems to be a never-ending appetite for psychological thrillers, and they've become a big mainstream, almost genre brand, I think, which was, of course, kick-started by 3 big, huge books, The Girl on the Train, Gone Girl, and Before I Go to Sleep. So I'm quite lucky to be writing now, I think, as opposed to 20 years ago, when I think a lot of psychological thrillers were either pushed into horror or pushed into more general fiction, and they were hard to, I think, articulate where they went within the genre. So I think it's up and down for different genres, and maybe the horror will have the resurgence and have it stay like the psychological thriller.
Well, it's had a lot of resurgence in things like Netflix and the TV shows. It's doing what, so it surprises me that it hasn't in books in some ways. But yeah, I guess I think the horror books do exist, but they're not always branded as such.
Yes, I was slightly worried about going into like knocking on the doors of horror territory with my latest, because there are things like exorcisms in it and stuff like that, or things that seem to be exorcisms, although not wanting to give anything away. And I was conscious of straying too far into another genre, which perhaps I shouldn't be worried about, and many authors do mix genres in their writing to great effect. But yeah, it is odd, particularly when you know where your books sit in a bookshelf or in a category online, and you're always worried about treading on another turf, really, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. We do see trends come round in fiction and things. So it'll be interesting to see, what's coming next, particularly after this time in lockdown. So we've started to have a few questions come in, and as a reminder, you can submit any questions that you want to ask these two in the Q&A box down below. So a question firstly from Beth says, what comes first for you, setting or character?
For me, I'd say definitely character. Character's really, 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 really important for me in my books. I think everything's built around the characters really, and settings, yeah, obviously really important, but definitely character first. Absolutely, 100%.
I think I'm going to sound awfully difficult. I'm so sorry, but I don't think I'd be able to divorce the two between the two. And all of it normally just arrives at once, which is the most kind of painfully opaque answer, I think. But I don't think I'd ever really be able to separate character, plot, setting. It all just arrives as one thing, really, for me. So it's a bit of a bad answer really to that one.
That's fair enough. I think it's interesting for people to know how different authors work in different ways. So definitely. Okay, so for both of you, your on the subject of character, for both of you, your books contain male and female protagonists throughout your backlist and your front list. As male authors, do you find it difficult to write authentic female characters? And do you have anyone that does anything like a beta read for you, or what sort of things do you do to make sure that you're combating that?
I think personally, I view sort of writing through any character the same really. I mean, I see it as part of the job of being an author. If I just made every character me, that'd be really boring. So, I mean, I think I basically just sort of think, whichever character I'm writing through, I just pick the best person to tell that particular story and start with that. And from that point, without really heavily overthinking it, just try to get under the skin of that character, whether it be male, female, old, young, whatever. And I think whether they're authentic or not is something for the readers to judge. I live with my wife and daughter, so I've got two female viewpoints there, which is really, really helpful if I am writing through a female character's viewpoint. And so far, all the editors I've had, one of which is Molly at the moment, have been female, so that's been helpful as well. So yeah, that's the way I look at it really.
Brilliant. Barnaby?
Yeah, it's an interesting one really, because I wrote my first book, my first book, A Version of the Truth, and I'll plug it here. There we go. That book, I was conscious, tackled some very difficult subject matter, which I wanted to make sure was done sensitively and done in a way that was part of the plot rather than seeming like a cheap, lazy device or anything like that. And I was asking the question quite a lot when I was writing it, whether to a friend who was reading it or to my agent and my editors, and as you said, all of which were happened to be female. But it wasn't really the idea itself of writing for a different gender even wasn't really on my mind when I was writing it. And I think if it was, it would have kind of hampered me in the process and would have stopped the flow of the writing really. So I'm quite pleased that wasn't too much on my mind, although I did write that 4 years ago now, and I think if I wrote it now with many different debates around the subject, it would probably be more front of my mind now, I think. And I've been quite pleased there have been some authors speaking quite vocally about this idea that everyone needs to write a very particular kind of thing set to them. And Bernardine Evaristo recently, who won the Booker for her brilliant book, Girl, Woman, Other, recently said she doesn't really believe in this idea that one writer should only really write their own experience or their own who they are themselves, because really that's not what fiction is. And it would worry me if we had to go down that road where everything became memoir, essentially. So I think it's important when I'm writing not to try to be hampered with that, and just to try to write the best book I possibly can, with the most convincing voice I possibly can. And then it's up to the reader to decide whether that was successful or not.
Yeah, I think I'd very much agree with all of that. I think you just have to. I remember the first time I did try and write through a female perspective. It was my second book. My first book was entirely through a male perspective, just one perspective, and then my second book had several perspectives. And one of them was a female perspective through a series of letters. And I remember starting it thinking, oh, is this going to be tricky or whatever? And then I just kind of stopped thinking like that and just wrote it like I would anything else. And I think that's kind of what you were saying as well. And I think that is a really good way of doing any character that you write in. I mean, I remember as a journalist, one of the things I used to find when I was interviewing people was you always had to get on the level of the person you were dealing with. So if you were interviewing, I don't know, say a homeless person, then you'd get on their level. If you're interviewing the CEO of a big company, you'd have to get on their level. I approach characters much the same, really, apart from the fact I'm actually trying to get inside their head. But yeah, you just sort of have to try and sort of empathize with that person as if they're a real person, and yeah, get in there.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And I think it's that I always try to think that you're writing that particular character, and the character of Kitty in Hold Your Breath, for example, isn't supposed to be representative of all women or all children or all people living in the 1980s. It is just representative of Kitty, and that's it. And the same way, I've just written a novel which will be out next year with half male, half female perspective, and neither character is supposed to be representative of the whole people of their gender or the whole people of their class or their background, anything like that. It is just their character. And I think once you get that individuality and you can empathize really with what the character's saying, I think then it becomes a lot more freer when you're writing, and I think when you're reading the book as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember getting one particular review. It was an Amazon review, I think, for my last book, My Sister's Lies, which it does have quite a lot of female perspective, actually. And the review said something along the lines of, I just finished this book and I can't believe it was written by a man. And I took that as a compliment. I thought, great, you know, I mean, she meant it as a compliment. It was a nice review. And I thought, you know, job done, really. That if I've managed to do that and you've not thought this is a man writing through a female perspective, then good.
Definitely, yeah, that's all really brilliant advice, I think, for anyone that's you know, writing characters at the moment. And both of you mentioned the writing flow in your answer. A couple of people have been asking, are you guys plotters or pantsers? And for anyone that doesn't know, a pantser is someone that just kind of goes ahead and writes and just sort of digs straight in. So interested to hear what you guys do.
Okay, so, well, myself, I would say I'm mainly a planner, but kind of half a little bit. So I'll always have a beginning, an end, a middle sketched out. My synopses are quite detailed in that regard, and I usually tend to stick to them. However, I'd like to have the maneuverability to change things, introduce twists and turns as I write it, because I think if you're actually wanting to sit down and plan everything in one go, it's quite a big expectation to come up with all those great ideas in one go. Whereas, you know, often I get a really nice idea. I might just be having a shower before I sit down to do some writing, or it might be at night just before I go to bed, and I'll get a great idea and think, ooh. And I think if you've not got the flexibility to introduce that, you're missing out on a really valuable tool. So yeah, I really like to introduce things. And with twists and turns particularly, I think if it's a twist and turn you didn't even know about as a writer when you introduced it, I think they can be even better than if you planned it.
Yeah, seeing what the writing.
Half, mainly planning, but with some flexibility.
Yeah. What about you, Barnaby?
I'm more of a meticulous planner, actually. Or obsessive, some could say. I can't really begin the full writing unless I've planned out every single character and every single chapter in the book, and I use it as a kind of like a map as I go through it. Otherwise, I fear I would be completely lost within the plot itself. So normally the first thing I do once I've got the plot in my head is I usually write kind of 3 lines, which, I mean, one could almost like think of as a kind of elevator pitch or as a kind of a very, very short summary as to what the general hook or the general question of the book is, or the general kind of outline. Then I normally go through every single main character, or at least every character that has like a speaking part, so to speak, and I usually cast them with individual actors from movies and TV, and like cut out their pictures from movies and have like a cast list basically. And this means that the characters fix into my mind a bit more, and I've got a face to kind of put to a name as I go through. And even if I change the names, which is very common, particularly later on in the editing process, I can then remember that person was so and so, and oh, that one's Judi Dench, and that one's, you know. So I find that a lot clearer in my head once I've got that nailed down. And then once I've cast everyone, that's when I do the full chapter by chapter breakdown of the entire book. And the document at the end usually ends up between 10 to 16,000 words. And I work out all the little plot problems along the way during that document. So when I actually come to the writing is actually rather joyful, because the things that would have snagged along the way have now gone. And before I get to that point, I've normally showed my chapter by chapter breakdown to my agent and got her feedback on it, and we've discussed any plot bits that may need changing or any bits that may not work. And it just all for me does the groundwork to make sure that the writing experience is as painless as possible, because it's my favorite bit, the writing experience. And I don't think I'd do it as well if I was trying to figure things out as I went along.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't quite know how full pantsers, if you want to call them that, do it, because I think I would find it really daunting to have nothing. I mean, Stephen King's one of the most famous ones, and he just starts with a concept, really, doesn't he? Like, what if this happened, and goes from there. And you know, I'd find that really quite scary. I don't think I'd want to do that.
It terrifies me. No,
I've obviously worked with a fair few authors, and they all do tend to have a different process, so it is interesting seeing how you guys work differently. So on the subject of writing and sort of getting from the start to the end, do you ever suffer from writer's block, and do you have any advice to get through it?
Yeah, definitely. I've experienced it. I think my experience of writer's block is not necessarily what people would think writer's block is. I think there's a sort of common, perhaps, misconception that writer's block means you can't write anything. That hasn't been my experience ever. I think you can always write something. I think my experience of writer's block is more a case of writing things that I don't like. So I'll sit down, I'll write something and think that's awful, or that's been my experience of it. And I've definitely experienced it from time to time. But the way to get out of it, in my experience, is just to keep writing. One of the pieces of advice I often give to people who are starting out, I always say, don't look back. Like, if you start writing something, don't keep trying to edit it as you go along, because you will hate it. From my experience, that's certainly what I find. And it's only after that piece of writing that you've just done has had some time to breathe, and you've got a lot further in the manuscript, preferably to the end, that you look back and maybe don't hate it quite so much. So yeah, I find if I experience those kind of things, I just basically try to plod on, and it sometimes takes a while. It's not necessarily easy, but I think it's just one of those things that comes with the job. Yeah, but for me, it's definitely more a case of a drop in self-confidence than an actual inability to write anything. Because being a journalist for like 10 years, you know, writing something I've done for so long, I can always write something. And if I've got a deadline to meet, I can always meet a deadline, because that was ingrained into me, as you know, from a young age as a journalist. But yeah, dithering and procrastination, that's all sort of part of writer's block, I think. And I think every writer's experienced. I'd be very surprised if anyone hasn't. But that's just my experience.
I again, I don't have a very useful answer to this. So I've never experienced writer's block. If anything, I just don't have enough time to actually do the writing that I need to do. Whenever I do get enough time to do it, I never have the problem of not being able to. So I think if I ever did suffer from it, and if that day ever comes, and fingers crossed it doesn't, but if it did, I think I would probably just stop writing and go and read. And I think even when you don't have writer's block, even when you're still writing normal, I think reading amazing books by other writers is a wonderful source of inspiration and a wonderful way to drive you on, because I think a lot of writers write because, I can't talk, you know, on their behalf, but I think I write because I'm always fascinated by the way authors can do certain things, and the way they can either keep you turning the pages, or if you read a particularly sad or frightening or affecting scene, you just stop and think, wow, my God, how did they really do that by just putting one letter in front of the other on the page? And I think if I struggle to write, I would just go and read as many books as I possibly could, and I think somewhere along the way I would get the drive to carry on, and I think hopefully the words would come to me. But all of that is hypothetical because I'm very lucky that it hasn't yet ever happened.
Yeah,
I think that's good advice. Really good advice. Reading is key to authors at all times. I think if I do meet an author who says they don't read, I'm always a little surprised by that. There's not many of them. I think most authors are, really, really keen readers. And yeah, I suppose, going outside and getting a change of scenery and that kind of thing, that can help if you're stuck in a plot hole or whatever. And I guess that would also help with writer's block.
Yeah, so actually we've had a great question that segues on from that very nicely. So what is your favourite book in the genre that you write in? Quite a hard question to just pick out one, but if you can.
Barnaby?
Yeah, it's very hard to pick out one. I have authors who I really like to go back to. I think I don't really know if it counts as a psychological thriller, but I suppose it's still a thriller. But Tana French's recent novel, The Witch Elm,
great. That's a great
I think,
one.
Yeah, is an extraordinary book of any genre, and I think it's remarkable what she could do with that. So I think that's one of my favourite books of all time, not even just of the psychological thriller genre, but of authors that I continually go back to. I find Ruth Rendell is one of the greats of the genre for a good reason. I think her books are just amazing, and she was one of the writers writing psychological thrillers not dissimilar to the ones that are very popular today. They weren't marketed in the same sort of way, and I think some of her best ones are written under the name Barbara Vine. But I would, I'd say definitely Tana French's The Witch Elm and the books of Ruth Rendell, and other authors I go back to quite a lot is Gillian Flynn is of course an absolute master of the genre, and C.L. Taylor, Kelly Taylor, who is another Avon author, which is lovely. But I think I've got her latest novel, Strangers, is there, which is really good.
Wow.
So I think those 3 or 4 I think I've mentioned now are always sources of inspiration for me, I think.
Yeah, some brilliant names in that list, I have to agree. Stuart, do you have anyone that you want to?
Yeah, I struggle with this kind of question, if I'm honest, because I tend to read from all kinds of genres. I don't necessarily read in my genre as such to any degree any more than any other genre. I mean, I suppose if you're looking at a book that's sort of written by a male author that deals with relationships and emotions and that kind of thing, I'd probably look at someone like David Nichols, like One Day or Us, which are both sat up there on my bookshelf. Or even his latest one, which I've forgotten the name of, but I've got somewhere on the shelf. I can't see. But yeah, someone like him, I suppose he's fantastic. But yeah, there's so many good books out there. It's so difficult. I mean, I just don't. When people say sort of what do you read, I read. I mean, that Witch Elm. I read that book in the last 6 months, and you're so right. It's a fantastic book. I mean, I absolutely love it. And someone said to me, well, what's it like? And I said, how do you describe that book? I said, for me, I said it reminded me slightly of some of Ian Banks's earlier stuff. And but then like there was a sort of Donna Tartt vibe to it as well. I don't know. I just think it was fantastic. And so out of just, I mean, it seemed to be sort of a crime book, but it's such more than that. It's a fantastic book.
Yeah, it's so hard to place, isn't it? It's it's quite extraordinary. Sorry, one other I would mention as well is Lisa Jewell. Lisa Jewell is just incredible. And we're talking about genre changes. She's done the most amazing genre change from Ralph's Party back in the, I think, late 90s, early 2000s, all the way to this absolute darkest possible book you can possibly get. I mean, this is kind of quietly terrifying. I think a lot of people have probably discovered Lisa Jewell already and don't need to say it, but if you haven't, I definitely recommend her, particularly her latest thrillers. If you like thrillers, they're mind-blowingly good.
It's interesting that she's managed to do it and still keep her name without changing it to something. Because that's
like J.S. Jewell or something. It's impressive.
Definitely. There's some really good recommendations there. And I do think it's very important to read both in your own genre, but, read in other genres too, just to sort of keep dipping in there. So perhaps a question that should have come before that, but Stuart, obviously you write women's fiction. It's very emotional, it tugs on the heartstrings, and Barnaby, your fiction is much darker. But both of you, something that both of you have in common is the fact that you really have very real issues at the centre of your stories. Is it tough to write about these subjects, and how do you think, or how do you ensure that you are handling them sensitively?
I mean, I think it's really important to deal with issues because, you know, that's real life. And I think I do like to involve all kinds of issues in my book. And in terms of actually dealing with them sensitively, it can be tricky. You know, I very much like to take on board advice I get on this from early readers or editors, because I think it's important. You don't always see things yourself when you write things that other people notice. And make you aware that you've perhaps not done something in the most sensitive way. But yeah, I suppose I tend to look at these things a bit like I would as a journalist, in that I think one of the most important things to do is just do the research and be as accurate as you can. And that's probably more important than anything. I remember with my first book, it's not necessarily an issue as such, but it's there was a character who had a mini stroke, which they call a TIA, and I was quite careful about the research I did for that. And 2 or 3 months after the book came out, someone actually contacted me and said, I was reading your book and my mum had one of these, and it was only because I'd read your book that I realised that's what it was, and I took it to the doctor, and you know, you might have saved her life. And I was like, wow, that's really nice, and it just shows how important it is to do the research. And I think, you know, approaching anything, just kind of be accurate with it. Be you know, don't be cavalier. And if you're dealing with an issue like my current book deals with homelessness quite a lot. And I remember when Molly was editing it, there was a couple of issues with that she sort of raised. And you know, I totally took them on board. And I think you've just got to try and approach things as best as you can. You're not always going to get it right. That's why we have an editing process.
Very true. What about you, Barnaby?
I think it's as you say, I think it's difficult really to think about one's books, I think, after they've been written, because you always see certain bits that you think you do differently, particularly if you're grappling with difficult subject matter. And I think I wrote my debut version of The Truth about maybe 5 years ago now, and I think if I wrote it today I would do some things differently within it. And I still really like it as a novel, but I think just when you're using very dark issues within a plot, I think it's always good to try to do it as best as you possibly can. So that was always on my mind when I was talking about the book with people. And I actually wrote my debut as a work in progress at the Faber Academy, and which is a wonderful creative writing course. And if anyone's watching this who is thinking about doing a creative writing course, I would really recommend the Faber Academy. It's a great way of, particularly if you've got a book that you're writing right now, it's wonderful to be able to bring bits in as homework and have other readers read it, and other people who want to be writers as well. And I had a brilliant writer as our mentor, Rowan Coleman, who writes fabulous books. And it was really good to talk through certain issues in the book with her and with the other pupils in the class about the best way to present them while making the plot still work and it still be very compelling. And books are still entertainment, and it's really hard, I think, to get entertainment with very serious, very dark and upsetting issues. So I think it is a constant process, and I don't think any writer would ever really be able to say they get it perfect, because when you're juggling all those different things, it's a very hard thing to do. But yeah, I just try to make sure I get a balance right, and if necessary, talk to people who could advise me in the right direction. For Hold Your Breath, I spoke to quite a few police officers about a certain way a crime within that book would have been handled. And yeah, I just think it's never going to be easy, and you just have to really just try the best you can do.
Brilliant advice. Yeah. So a couple of people are asking about sort of the ideas that you guys have come up with for your books, how you come up with those ideas, and whether you find it difficult to land on concepts and hooks, obviously that all important hook that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I think for me, ideas. I don't think I could ever say exactly where ideas come from. I think you never quite understand that as an author. Well, I don't. Sometimes it's a case of waiting for them to come, and I think if you wait too hard, they don't come. And then when you're not waiting, then they hit you in the face. I remember the idea for my first. It wasn't actually the first book I ever wrote, but my first published book, Time to Say Goodbye. I was in the situation where I was trying to come up with an idea, and I went to the John Rylands Library in Manchester, which is a lovely building. It's got a sort of Hogwarts feel about it. And I thought, I'm going to go in there, I'll sit in there for a while and see if I can come up with a good idea. And I sat in there for several hours, didn't come up with anything. And then I went downstairs to the cafe, and that's where I came up with a one-line synopsis for Time to Say Goodbye. And in that case, it was just usually the first sense I get of a book is an image in my head. So in Time to Say Goodbye, I had this image of a little girl stood in a playground with a sort of a ghost of a dead father stood in front of her. And that was basically one of the early scenes of the book. And I built it all from there. And most of my books do start with this little one image in my head, which is like the starting scene or an early scene of the book. And then I just build it from there. But where those ideas come from, I mean, if you try too hard to come up with an idea, well, in my experience, you don't get one. You have to sort of it comes when it comes to some extent. And I have all sorts of ideas, and I jot them down, often late at night, and then I look at them the next day, and I'm like, no, never going to write that. So I've got books of ideas which you come up with, one-line ideas, which seem fantastic at sort of 1 a.m, but don't seem quite so good the next day. So usually it's a case of going through loads and loads of ideas until I finally find an idea that I like the next day and like the next week, and then develop it. That's how it works for me.
And can make sense of as well. Sometimes I write things down in the middle of the night. And
Illegible handwriting. Yeah, I've got illegible handwriting.
What about you, Barnaby? How do you settle on ideas, particularly for your first book or so?
I don't really know, to be honest, and it's similar to my dreadfully unsatisfying answer to the question about what comes first. They normally just arrive completely as one thing, almost like I think the best way to describe it would be like a painting. Really, a painting is all just one complete thing, and the process behind it, the individual colours, the individual drawings, and the underlays and that kind of thing, isn't really visible once you've got the full painting, and that's how it almost kind of arrives in my head. And in terms of looking for ideas or getting them, I normally have too many and not enough time, and I've got 3 or 4 books planned or plotted out that I would love to just sit down and write, but I haven't got the time to go and do them. I have to do them quite slowly. I quite often write 2 books concurrently because I quite like going between the two, two characters. And I know it's strange. I never thought this was odd until I spoke to other authors about it. But it's weird. I think it gives me a distance from each one, and then when I've returned to it, it's
how do you not get
to see it a bit better. Sorry, Stuart, what did you say?
How do you not get confused which is which? Like characters, the wrong book, and
they're often very different. Hold Your Breath was written at the same time as so that's very kind of sort of horror-y, set in a forest, quite creepy, set in a very different environment, distance from what most people's ordinary life is. And I wrote that at the same time as another book about a mother who'd her child had died in a terrorist attack, and which that one's coming out at some point next year. And I found that not very hard to go between the two because they were so different in their environment and in their characters, and in the subjects they tackled and the settings. They had quite a different feel and quite a different sort of shade or colour to them. So I don't think I would have been able to write a slightly macabre, slightly horror-y novel at the same time as Hold Your Breath. I think that would have been too much. But I do find when I do write the 2 books at the same time, they do differ quite substantially in their setting and in their feel and their tone. But I mean, they're all thrillers really. But I'm still not sure where the ideas come from, and I'm lucky so far that I haven't been in a position where I need to find an idea quickly. They've been there kind of waiting. So like the writer's block thing, I live in fear of that not being the case at some point, really.
Yeah, I actually have another author that likes to write concurrently, and she has a lighter book that she writes, and then something that's a bit more hard hitting. But that baffles me as well, Stuart. I don't think I could.
I don't even really like starting a new book until I'm totally done with the previous book, because the crossover I struggle with it. I mean, now I'm working on my next book, and you sort of you push it. Well, I find I push away the old characters a little bit, and then when I come back to talk about it, like the one that's coming out, and I'm like, right, I have to get it straight in my head again who they all are, because I think I very much like to just sort of throw myself into one thing and sort of get absorbed by it. But hats off to you if you can do two. I wish I could.
I do find I get into the weird situation where I feel like I'm cheating on the other book, and then I get very much within the world of that one, and feel like, oh, I've neglected the other. So I do get torn between the two sometimes.
Absolutely. So obviously we're finding ourselves in quite a strange time at the moment. Have you guys found that it's affected your writing routine? I know that obviously, Stuart, you're more used to working from home, but obviously there are probably a few more distractions around. So how are you staying motivated?
Yeah, it's been interesting for me, because on paper I haven't really changed that much what I do, because I work from home anyway, and I'm still working from home. However, I did find it tricky at the start. I really did, because I was just starting. I was just getting started on my next book at the time, and I always find with that it takes a little bit to get motoring. It's always a little bit of a slow process at the beginning, and then it builds up. And it was very slow getting going on this one, I have to say. And I think that was just the fact that I've got my wife working from home, and I've got my daughter working from home, and the house was sort of mine in the day, and I could sort of be wherever I wanted to, and slob around in my dressing gown or whatever I wanted to do. And yeah, it was really strange to start with, having them working from home. I have to say now I've found my groove, and I actually quite like it. It's almost better in some ways, because there's a structure, because my daughter's doing her schoolwork, my wife's doing her work remotely, and I'm doing mine. We meet for lunch, which is nice. I've got a bit of socializing rather than just being by myself with the cat. And yeah, it's actually good now. I've actually got into it, and I mean, none of it's good what's going on around us, obviously, but I mean, in terms of getting used to the situation, which is not going away anytime soon, I've got used to it.
Yeah, and Barnaby, obviously things are a bit different for you as well.
Yes, they are. It's difficult on some levels, and not as much on others. I think my other work, my social media work, has become extremely busy, and even though I'm doing it all from home, it takes up a lot of time and a lot of concentration, I think. And when I'm at the moment spending lockdown in my parents' home in Essex, but I normally live in central London. And one of the things I would usually do to figure out, plot things in my head, would be to go for walks around London where I live, and just kind of taking the atmosphere and let the ideas kind of come to the surface. And I haven't really been able to do that as much here. And I also think, because I'm spending most of the time in the house on my laptop doing my day-to-day work, I then don't have the variety of what I would have had when I was living in London during normal times, which is I go to like Cafe Nero or another coffee shop, or go somewhere else to write, and you get that variety, I think, and it does amazing things to the concentration. Whereas at the moment, there really is the option just for me to do my day-to-day work at home and then sit and write at home, and not talk to anyone else, which is quite lonely. So I've been writing a lot less, I think, during lockdown, simply because the variety isn't there. And I don't normally write at lunchtimes anymore, which is what I would have normally done before. So I'm kind of very much going against the whole, recently in one of the Avon lockdown show videos, one of the things was about the writing advice, and one of the writing advice I gave during that was don't worry about writing every day, because I think so often I read on lists that you must write every day, and that's what all authors do, write every day, which isn't true. And I think it's very liberating when you realise you don't have to write every day. Days can go by, and as long as you're, of course, keeping your deadlines and doing it responsibly, and still keeping on time, I don't think it matters too much. And at the moment, I'm just writing at weekends now, but I've got the deadline for my for one of my books next year is in October, so I need to make sure that actually gets done. But yeah, it's had a probably, if I had to choose one side, I'd say it's a negative effect on the writing output so far. And although the biggest, most devastating effect it's had for me on my concentration wise has been on reading. I found it incredibly hard to read new books during this time. I don't know why, but I can't concentrate on them. And it's there was an article that was shared a lot on social media that said it was like losing a friend during the most difficult time. And that's very been my experience. I've kind of lost one of my favorite things to do, and the way I've kind of tried to get myself back into it is I've been revisiting J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter novels. But yeah, I'm hoping this month at least I've been getting back into new fiction and listening to some great audiobooks. But yeah, that's been the most difficult side. And as we spoke about earlier, I think it's very hard to be a writer when you're not a reader. And I've been struggling with that. But yeah, I'm hoping it's just temporary.
What you say about writing and reading, I often find if I'm having a bad patch of writing, I'm not reading anything very good. And then if I'm reading something good, it'll really help with my writing. And because I'm really into, I'll find that I'm really into my own writing. Don't know why it happens like that. Just sort of enthusiasm spreads, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
I have to say that the lovely weather that we were having really helped me with my reading, because obviously you could sit outside and
yeah, that's nice.
But that's now gone, so we're going to have to self-motivate. So Barnaby, you mentioned audiobooks. I know that you're both fans of audiobooks, and I'm a huge fan of audiobooks as well. I love them normally when I'm commuting, but also, you know, you can listen to them whilst you're doing your daily exercise or cooking or anything like that. So what is your favorite thing about audio? And do you guys have any favorite audio readers? Or I know Barnaby, for example, you were quite involved in the audio process for your latest book. So if there's anything you can tell us about the process from the author's point of view.
Do you want to go first on that, Barnaby?
Sure. Yeah, I love audio because it allows me to like go off walking on long walks or go around the shops and that kind of thing. You don't have to put the book down. You can just carry on with it. And I think I prefer it to actually reading on the page, because there's something in the performance aspect of it. It feels sort of like an adaptation of a work in and of itself, because the performer brings something new to the writing. It's almost like having your work adapted in some way, and I find it very exciting going to the studio for both books to see the narrators. And the narrator of Hold Your Breath, the wonderful Katie Sobey, just does an extraordinary performance as Kitty, the 10-year-old girl, as the narrator of the novel. So I think it's the freedom that audio gives you. I think when you're listening to it, I think it's the dramatic side that it can give you. But I like to have, I usually have 2 or 3 audiobooks on the go at any one time, and I kind of switch through them to suit my mood. And I usually have a psychological thriller, quite similar to the genre I write in. And I normally have another book that's quite different, usually general fiction or that kind of thing. Although at the moment I'm listening to a brilliant book, My Dark Vanessa, which is about a young girl's relationship with a teacher, and a very questionable relationship. It's the reader, I can't remember the name of the reader, which is very bad, but she does it absolutely amazingly. And we were talking about sensitive subject matters, and she gets the nuances, I think, of that just so brilliantly across. And I think the book of that is this one. Really recommend that. And I'm also listening to Lionel Shriver's latest book, The Motion of the Body Through Space, which is really wonderfully sharply written. And I think Lionel Shriver is a brilliant author, really taking the scalpel to so many different things. And she's, I think, wickedly smart with her phrase. But that's a very fun one to listen to on audio, because the main character in it is an audiobook narrator herself. And is having a lot of difficulties with her job, and it's an interesting experience hearing it being narrated as an audiobook when the main character is narrating audiobooks. So that's quite fun. And I also always have classics on the go, from Jane Austen to Harry Potter or Charles Dickens, and they're often read by some of the greatest actors of our time, from Miriam Margolyes to Stephen Fry and people like that. So I like the range and the mix you can get with audio, and it does link up with dramatic arts and drama and that kind of thing. So it's just so much there to enjoy.
Yeah, again, that baffles me. I cannot listen to more than one at once. So there you go. I can't swap and change. I've got to have all my concentration on one. What about you, Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I just have to say, I think it's a huge skill, but that these audiobook narrators do. I mean, I've obviously given readings myself of my own books at sort of events and that kind of thing. And I always find it difficult doing the different voices and that kind of thing. And the ones they do it well, I mean, they do it so well, it's amazing. I mean, I don't know how they do it as well as they do, but like, you know, particularly if you've got, like in my first book, there one of the characters is a very young girl, and the main character is a father who's sort of in his 30s, and you know, being able to just skip from one to the other and do it, you know, it's fantastic. I mean, my latest one, How to Save a Life, I've not actually heard the audiobook from that yet, but there's a great guy called John Sackville who's reading that, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's done with it. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Bluetooth headphones myself, and I think, you know, they just give you the freedom to sort of listen to things wherever. And yeah, I think the other thing is that there's a lot of people who wouldn't be readers necessarily if audiobooks weren't available because they don't like reading for whatever reason. And I've got several friends who love audiobooks but never read physical books. And so, you know, you're opening up a whole new world of readers and a whole new world of books to those readers. So it's fantastic, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So a fun question, this one will probably be quite speedy, but do you guys have a favourite writing snack?
Writing snack, well, Kit Kat.
Yes, I love a Kit Kat too.
I don't really have one. I think I quite enjoy like stopping to go and like have lunch or that kind of thing. So I don't often eat anything while writing because that would take away the fun of having the break to go and find something to eat. So yeah, nothing particular.
It's easy to make a messy keyboard as well, isn't it?
That's true, you want to keep it. Okay, so one last question. This will probably round us off. So at Avon, we like to share our peaks and our pits of the week over a drink at the end of a long week. So this is quite a big question, but can you guys share your pit and your peak of your writing career?
Sure. I mean, I would say the pit of my career would be the first novel I ever wrote is currently still gathering dust in a drawer, and I basically wrote that after leaving journalism, and that was my sort of first attempt at writing a novel. And I wrote it, I polished it, I sent it out to various literary agents, etc. And I think the pit was the point when I thought, this isn't going anywhere, I need to give up on this one and start something else. And that was really hard because I put a lot of work into that book, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And at that point I thought, you know, it's either give up or write another one. And fortunately I chose to write another one, which turned out to be my first published book. And I now look back on it as a sort of learning curve. I didn't do a creative writing course, but I kind of see that first book, which is called Too Early for Flapjacks, and will probably never see the light of day, as my learning curve. So yeah, that would be the pit. At the time it felt awful, but you know, it was the right decision to make, and it worked out. In terms of peak, I kind of hope the peak's still to come. I think you've got to look that way. I've had some great peaks, as in when my first book was published, holding that in the hands for the first time, seeing it do well, have international copies. And you know, I was really pleased to see my last book, My Sister's Lies, do well in America, which is the first time I've experienced that, and that was fantastic. But yeah, hopefully the peaks are still to come.
Yeah, that's a good attitude, I think. Even more peaks. Barnaby, what about you?
I think there's a lot to choose from, I think, from both sides. I think one of the most difficult things to cope with was when I was first starting out trying to look for literary agents before I got my brilliant agent, Joanna, was I came very close, well, I felt close at the time to signing with an agent, or at least attracting the interest of an agent who read the book that I was at that time sending around and really liked it and wanted to see the full manuscript, which then happened, and then said that wasn't quite the book for them, but they really liked the pitch for my next book that I was writing at that point and wanted an exclusive on it. And then I sent it over, and then literally never heard anything ever again. And it felt like one of those times that felt you got so close to something you'd wanted so much for so long, and it then just flatlined. And it wouldn't be for a couple of years after that that I did get my agent with a completely different book, which is the third book I wrote, which turned out to be a version of the truth. And I wouldn't want it any other way, because my agent's fantastic, and I love being a HarperCollins author, and all that may not have happened if it had gone the other way at the time. But I think when those things do happen, it feels like you have just about almost reached the thing you really want, and then suddenly it feels a million miles away all over again. Which is very hard to then carry on doing, and then write another book, and then resubmit that book, and then do it all, continue until it finally does work. But yeah, I think that was probably one of the hardest times. In terms of the best times, I think I did think it was going to be, and this shows where one's perception of what will be brilliant and what isn't can really play against each other. But around the time of my first book being published, there were quite a few videos of authors, debut authors, getting their copy of their debut book and unwrapping it and bursting into tears. And these went viral on social media. And this was just before I got the copies of my book, and to see the emotional impact that it had. And I don't want to denigrate that in any way, and I'm sure they were sincere. So in my head, I built this up to a very momentous moment. And then when my books arrived at my office in the head office of Waterstones, and along with many other boxes of other books from other authors and other publishers, it was kind of like, oh, well, here they are, sort of situation. It didn't feel anywhere near as momentous as I thought it would, and it didn't feel like a life-changing lightning strike. And I think it's because you see so many different bits along the way. You see the covers, you see the jackets, you see the spreads, you see the proofs, all that kind of thing. So when the final thing does arrive, it can feel a little bit anticlimactic, I think. So yeah, that wasn't quite the biggest one as I thought it would be. But I think one of the things that really did stick in my mind, particularly around the time of the publication of my debut, was at Waterstones we get bestseller reports for the best-selling books across the company for each day and each week. And I remember looking through the bestseller reports and seeing my book listed on the bestseller lists that we'd get in our daily emails. And I looked through those emails every day normally, just to get a gist of the books that were selling well. And then to suddenly see my name in that list was just so strange and really brilliant and really surreal. So yeah, I won't forget that. I think that was probably one of the big high points.
That's a great way to end it. A nice ending point there, I think. So thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you everyone that's been listening for all your brilliant questions. And as a reminder, if you guys have seen this and it's inspired you to either start writing or finish that manuscript, then do just remember that you can submit to us here at Avon Books, so avonbooks.co.uk/submissions. You don't need an agent, and all the guidelines are on the website there for you, so just head over there. But yeah, I think that should take us to the end there. So thank you guys. I don't know whether you've got anything you want to say as a parting word.
No, just thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.